Welcome to the Kick the Habit Forever podcast. My name is Michael Quirk. I'm a licensed therapist, coach, and educator. I've spent the last 25 years working with high-performing men, helping them to break free of the addictions, compulsion, bad habits, painful symptoms, and skills deficits that hold them back. If you're a high-performing man and your goal is to get control over your porn use, then this podcast is for you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here today. The other day, a client asked me a question. He wanted to know how I thought that a person could tell if they're addicted to porn. I thought that's something that a lot of people wonder about. So that's what we're going to tackle today. It's an important topic: how to know if you're addicted to pornography. Pornography is often a difficult and sensitive subject to discuss, but I believe that by addressing it openly, if we just talk about it freely, we can better understand its potential impact on our lives and on our relationships. So let's talk about understanding what pornography addiction is. And before we go much further into how to recognize porn addiction, let's first define what we're talking about by the term pornography addiction. Pornography addiction, it's not simply the use of pornography. It's more the case that when the consumption of your porn use becomes compulsive, when it doesn't feel like a choice anymore, when it feels driven, and when the negative effects start to damage your personal life, your relationships, your work, and your emotional well-being. In essence, addiction occurs when your behavior around watching adult content is no longer a conscious choice. It's not something that you decide, but instead you start to feel driven by an uncontrollable need or by a habit that just takes over you. So, just like any other addiction, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, food, TV, social media, pornography addiction follows a pretty similar pattern of craving, using, and then often feeling shame or guilt afterwards. It's important to know that using porn doesn't necessarily lead to addiction, right? There are some people that can, for example, uh, control their drinking, right? They can drink when they want to, they can drink how much they want to, and it's not an issue for that. And it's the same thing with watching adult content. So if you're starting to see certain patterns emerge for you, then it might be time to take a more thorough look, a more thorough inventory. Let's talk now about what are key signs of porn addiction. What are the signs that I see every day in my practice? And how can you tell if you're addicted to pornography? Here are some common things I see. Probably the first one, the most notable one, is that you feel a loss of control. That's one of the hallmark signs of addiction: losing control over your behavior. If you find that despite your intention to cut back or to stop using porn, that you just keep returning to it over and over again, then you probably are experiencing a loss of control. So you might have good intentions and you might promise yourself that this is the very last time, or that going forward, you get a rein on yourself and your urges. But then you find yourself going back over and over again and again. That's what I'm talking about: a loss of control over what you do and maybe even when you do it or how. The next thing I see is escalation. That's another important sign of compulsive porn use. This means that over time, you find that you need more frequent or more extreme forms of pornography to get the same level of pleasure and satisfaction. I've had many men talk with me about that they find themselves more frequently using porn or drifting into content that they, on some level, find unsettling or disturbing, but they find themselves craving it just to get the same level of high. This mirrors exactly how people with substance addictions often uh, need larger and larger doses or more frequent use in order to get the same effect. In porn addiction, it may take more explicit or more novel content to satisfy your urges. So be on the lookout for that. The next thing that I see in my practice is that people tell me that they end up neglecting their important life responsibilities. So if your use of pornography is starting to interfere with your responsibilities, whether those are at work, at school, in your family relationships, your friendships, your personal, intimate relationships, that is a warning sign that's important for you to pay attention to. Maybe you're staying up too late and watching porn. And so you can't focus at work. Or perhaps you're even missing. The other day, I was speaking with somebody and he's beginning to regularly miss his early morning meetings because he's consistently staying up late at night, hooked on watching porn, and then he's oversleeping his alarm clock. And so, if another thing that you might look for, if you're neglecting your partner because you're spending too much time with pornography. Now, you might be neglecting your partner in all sorts of ways. You could be neglecting your partner sexually. You could be neglecting your partner emotionally, or it not might be that you're even not spending recreational time. I've had many men talk with me about that, about how they're just not doing things with their partner. They're not going out on dates much anymore. They're not living life because pornography is sucking up more and more of their time and their attention. And it's serving as a greater and greater form of entertainment for them. The next sign I want to talk with you about is isolation. Now, this is an important one because if you've ever dealt with anybody who struggles with an addiction, you know that addiction thrives in secrecy. So if you find yourself withdrawing from social situation, if you find yourself lying to your loved ones, if you find yourself spending more and more time alone in order to engage in watching adult content, this could be a sign that your porn addiction is beginning to take over. Now, I want to talk with you about another important sign of porn addiction, and that is frequent negative emotions or increasing negative emotions. So, here's what I'm talking about. After you use porn, you start to feel guilty, ashamed, anxious, or perhaps even frustrated with yourself. I've had many men tell me that their porn use makes them angry. It makes them very frustrated, impatient, and critical with themselves because there's a part of them that expects a lot more. It's common for somebody struggling with addiction to feel trapped in a cycle, temporary relief, followed by intense feelings of regret and then back to feeling bad again. When I say bad, I'm talking about bored, anxious, scared, sad, depressed, just in a bad place. So it's a cycle that just loops over and over and over again. If these negative emotions are frequent for you, it's a likely indication that you are dealing with a compulsion or addiction to adult content. Now, let's say a few words about your brain and pornography addiction. It's helpful to understand what happens in your brain during pornography use, and why that can lead to its becoming addictive. Pornography use stimulates the release of dopamine, and that's a powerful neurotransmitter. It's it's a it's something that's associated with pleasure. It's associated with reward and how we learn what we call seeking behaviors. So each time you view porn, it feels good, right? It brings you pleasure, and your brain gets a hit of dopamine. And this reinforces the urges to view porn, and it shapes your actions to seek it out. Over time, this dopamine release can lead to a kind of desensitization, meaning that what once fied you no longer does. And this is particularly true because of the environment that we're living in, where social media, the entertainment industry knows how to work your dopaminergic system. They know how to get you hooked. So we're living in a time and a place where our brains are constantly, the buttons are being pushed to get us to pay attention, to get us to click on advertisements, to get us to stay hooked on social media, and to get us to watch pornography. So we're talking about a cycle that drives you to seek out more extreme, more frequent porn use in order to achieve the same effect that it once had. Now, I'll tell you from working with people, this creates a cycle that can sometimes be quite difficult to break. Just like other addictions, other substances, the brain starts to crave these dopamine surges just to bring it back to normal, just so that you're not feeling bad. And so what happens is when your dopamine levels start to drop, then you feel bad. You feel irritable, bored, cranky, depressed. Um, and so it becomes harder and harder to resist the temptation and to resist the urges. Now that brings us to the next sign that I want to talk with you about, and that is the impact on your relationships. One of the biggest consequences of pornography addiction is how it affects your relationships. Pornography creates unrealistic expectations about sex, about bodies, about intimacy, and about what healthy human sexuality is. If you're in a relationship, porn addiction can lead to a growing dissatisfaction with your partner. It can it can stoke a lack of emotional connection, and it even can cause sexual dysfunction. Many people who struggle with pornography addiction report to me that they feel quite disconnected from their partner, as if the intimacy that they once shared is no longer enough. It's not enough emotionally, and it's not enough sexually. This results frequently in reduced communication. It creates feelings of inadequacy on your part, and quite possibly on, on behalf of your partner too. And what happens is a growing emotional distance, a chasm opens up between the two of you. It's important. I want you to recognize that a healthy relationship is a relationship that's built on trust. It's one that has solid communication. It's one that has mutual respect. Things that are eroded by pornography addiction. So you might be asking yourself right about now, if you are addicted, here's what I want you to ask yourself. Here's what I want you to reflect on. These are a few important questions that will help you to clarify if you're if you're a person who's concerned about your relationship with pornography. First, do you often watch pornography, even if you don't really want to? You just find yourself being hijacked by a habit, getting taken over by the urge to watch porn. Do you spend increasing amounts of your time viewing porn and searching for more and more stimulating, more and more interesting material? Is your pornography use interfering with your ability to maintain your healthy relationships? Does it get in the way of your responsibilities? Is it getting in the way of work? Have you already stopped or tried to stop using porn, but you failed to do so? Maybe you tried, maybe you couldn't do it. Maybe you've tried a couple of times. Is that what's going on? Do you feel anxious? Do you feel guilty or ashamed after you watch pornography? Now, if you are sitting there and you've answered yes to several of these questions that I've just asked you, then it might be time for you to evaluate whether you are indeed developing a dependency on pornography. So that leads us to next steps. What do you do if you think that you are indeed addicted? If you suspect that you're dependent on pornography, remember, recognizing this issue is the first and it's the most important step, right? Because you can't do anything about it until you really get that it's a struggle for you. And once you do, here are some important ways for you to move forward. First of all, please talk to somebody that you trust. Now, that could be a therapist, a friend, a partner. Sharing your struggle can help you start to begin to address it. Now, I want to encourage you to talk with someone who is wise, someone who is emotionally safe, somebody who is not going to judge you, but who's also not going to collude with you and rubber stamp your porn use. And that's important because, you know, when we've got compulsions or dependencies or addictions, often we have other people in our lives that share the same habits, right? And there's that phrase, if you want to know who you are, look at who the five closest people to you are. Um, right. That's because we seek out people who rubber stamp our life choices. And that's human, that's natural, but it's also something that really holds us back and prevents us from taking a balanced look at our addictions and our dependencies. Next, consider getting professional help. It can be hard to find your way out, to disentangle yourself from a dependence or from an addiction or a compulsion. And there are people out there, there are therapists that specialize in sex and porn addiction. There are workshops, trainings you can take part in. There are groups you can participate in. And these all can provide you with tools to better manage and overcome your addiction. Next, set boundaries. Try setting time limits. Try putting uh, uh, time limits on the devices that you're using, or you might start to use apps that help you restrict access, porn blockers that will prevent you from accessing pornographic content. These work well for some people, and um, they can provide enough of a delay or enough of an obstacle to using. Now, I've also seen that for many people, they're not enough. They just, you know, set up their porn blockers, and then uninstall them over and over and over again in a repeated cycle. So pay attention to whether it actually works for you and produces the result that you're looking for. Next, I want you to find healthier outlets. It's important that you engage in hobbies, exercises, and activities that bring you joy, that give you a sense of fulfillment in your life, and that don't serve up the negative consequences that are associated with addictions, compulsions, and dependencies. All right. So let's review. In closing, pornography in itself is probably not inherently harmful. It's not necessarily harmful for everybody, but it can become problematic when it starts to interfere with your life, when it damages your relationships, when it destabilizes your mental health. The signs of addiction can often be subtle at first, but with any addiction, it can increase and spiral out of control over time. If you're questioning your relationship with pornography, please explore it further. I encourage you to do that. Seek support and take steps towards healthier patterns. There's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in educating yourself. There's no shame in seeking out resources, and recognizing the problem is actually a courageous first step towards change and growth. I want to thank you for your attention today. And remember, the good thing is we are living at a time where there is help available. We have resources. So you don't have to go through this journey alone. Find out more about how I can help you overcome your porn habit by having a look in the description below. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Thanks for listening today. I'd like to invite you to view my free class. It's called How to Kick the Habit Forever. In it, we talk about what you have to do in order to unhook yourself from compulsively using adult content. Go to www.kickthehabitforever.com now to view it.